Chapter 11. The mighty butcher and his thin, goitrous wife took them in. Abigail was washed, fussed over, acclaimed. The constables brought back Mr. Bow, who had relapsed into his melancholy trance-like state. "I'll not put it down in my notebook this time, ma'am," said the senior ponderously to Mrs. Talisker, "for the sake of the childer, like. But it's got to stop. Oh, yes, or there'll be no way of keeping him out of the madhouse. Why, he could have had some poor creature's napper off. Snip, snap." The butcher retrieved Dovey's bride chest from the Chinese laundry and brought it to them. He dropped a vast hand on Mr. Bow's shoulder as he crouched in the thin wife's tidy parlour. "Don't fret, Sam, me old cock-spourer," he assured him. "I've already put two of me stoutest apprentices in to see none of the villains about here get into what's left of the cottage during the night and nab your bits and pieces. And as for rebuilding, why, we'll get some of the lads together and have you back in business before you can say Walker." Granny, very wan and shrunken, but somehow tranquil and content, was with Abigail. "Well, lass, you did what you were sent for. You saved Dovey for Judah, and now the gift will have a double chance of survival." "I think it's immortal after all," said Abigail. She managed to smile. "I'd like that. I'm tired," she added inconsequentially. Her eyes closed in spite of themselves. She knew the mighty butcher gathered her up, for she could smell lamb chops and suet, put her into some bed, but she did not stay awake to find out where she was. "Stay a while with us," begged Dovey the next day, "for you're one of the family, Abby. True." "No," said Abigail. "I have to go home. You know that." Her green dress looked strange to her. It had been so long since she had seen it. She saw it was not very well made. It was not worthy of the lace-like crochet. Abigail put on the dress. It fitted more tightly across the chest. "My figure's coming at last," she thought. Inside she was cold and without feeling, like a volcano covered with ice. Granny examined the crochet again. "Well," she said gaily, "I'll have to live long enough to make it, so maybe I'll with you all the while yet." Granny agreed that it must be Beatie alone who took Abigail to the corner of the lane in Harrington Street, where she had so unexpectedly stepped through the door in the century. "And with the dark coming down as it was in your time," she said. Abigail began to get anxious that the time would not go fast enough, that whatever numbed her heart would vanish and let the pain free, especially when she had to say goodbye. Dovey wept as she kissed her. Abigail thought, "I ought to be feeling that I could kill her, but I don't," she said. "I wish you happiness, Dovey. You deserve it. Judah." Could she say goodbye to Judah? He kissed her cheek, a swift brotherly dab. "Goodbye," said Abigail in a low voice. He looked for a moment into her eyes. Did he shake his head, ever so slightly, before he let her go her shoulders and hastened away to rejoin his ship? She did not look after him. "What are you dilly-dallying for?" cried Beatie tetchily from the door. "Do you think I want to come home in the pitch dark?" Gibbie was asleep in bed, and Mr. Bow did not look up as she said goodbye, but Granny held her close to her corseted bosom. "You think you've been badly treated, hen," she said. "Not so. I told you once and I tell you again, the link between you and us Taliskers and Bows is nae stronger than the link between us and you." "Oh, Granny," cried Abigail. She gave the old woman a hug. "I wish you were my Granny, in truth. For the love of Blanky Heaven and all eternity, will ye come?" yelled Beatie. The little girl hopped from one bare foot to another. Her face was like a thundercloud. So Abigail went, hastening down Argyle Street with Beatie, not looking back, for she was afraid to do so. "There's no reason to be still angry," said Abigail. "Your shona kissed him when he was Dovey's," snapped Beatie. She snorted. "Any road, how do I ken you won't be back, worming your way twixt Judah and Dovey? Because I saw the manner he looked at you when he said goodbye. Oh, aye, I saw." Abigail suddenly felt weary, tired of Beatie's tantrums, and angry with her too. She was glad to feel angry, because the anger drove down the sadness. "I won't be back because as soon as I get home I'll burn the crochet, that's why." Beatie slid her a look. "Honour bright? Take it or leave it," said Abigail cantankerously. They marched in grumpy silence down the street. It was as crowded as a fairground, for Monday was market day. Outside the penny dance hall hung ornate glass lamps on curly brackets. Though the dark had not come, they were lit, their long blue and yellow tongues lolling in the salty breeze. Abigail saw Maud the dress lodger outside, surrounded by disarrayed redcoats, already half drunk. The girl was in the most vivid of grass-green dresses. A pork-pie hat full of velvet pansies crowned her fantastic coiffure. The sweet smell of hot gin filled the air. "Look," said Abby, pulling at Beatie. "There's one of the girls from the house in the Suez Canal." Beatie pulled her arm away haughtily. The street was full of stalls and barrows and roped-off enclosures where there were dancing dogs, an Indian juggler, and something mysterious called the infant phenomenon. They turned the corner of Harrington Street. past the ragged school, where the infants of vanished parents, gutter children who lived in cracks in the rocks and under counters and old doors, were taught the rudiments of civilization side by side with the children of the respectable poor, such as Beatie Bow. "Beatie," said Abigail. After a moment she shouted, "Take that blanky look off your obstinate little mug, will you?" Beatie unwillingly snorted a laugh, quickly retrieved it, and growled, "Well, what do you want? Spit it out." "I want to say that you can hate me or whatever you like, but please go to Mr. Taylor and tell him what you already have learned. Tell him that you wish to be educated, girl or not. Ask him if he'll tutor you privately." Beatie was startled out of her sulks. "'Twould be improper to approach a gentleman. Favour wouldn't permit me." "Oh, damn favour," cried Abigail. "You have to look out for yourself, you dummy. How'll you ever get anything if you don't march in and bully-rag people into giving it to you? Or maybe you're too chicken-hearted." Beatie turned scarlet. She clattered Abigail on the arm with her hard little fist. "I'll punch you yeller and green, drat ya." Abigail saw ahead of the lamp that lit the steep stairs to the alley which ran down to the playground. Beatie kicked angrily at the curbstone. Her face was undecided, back to its crabbed urchin look. "I know you hate me because I fell in love with your brother. Well, he doesn't love me, never did and never will, and I did save Dovey for him. 'Twas no more than what you were sent for," said Beatie churlishly. Abigail lost her temper. "Oh, you know everything, don't you? Let me tell you, you sulky little pig. You know nothing about love, that's one thing. You have to experience it to know how powerful it is." Here she stopped, dumbstruck, remembering who had said the same words to her. "Anyway," she said, "I lost, didn't I? So goodbye and good luck." But Beatie said nothing. She did not even look at Abigail. Abigail left her and went down the stairs. Halfway down the lane she saw the brightly painted loco engine, the space rocket and the monkey bars waver out of the twilight like a superimposed photograph. She looked back, quickly, saw Beatie growing transparent. The bottle green shawl turned into a cobweb. The pale little oval of her face shone for a moment and was gone. Did she see an uplifted hand waving her goodbye? "Beatie!" she cried. But there was nothing at the alley's top but the worn stairs. The blank walls of tall warehouses made walls for that steep crevice, brightly lit by shadowless electric light from some unseen globe. Abigail turned away. Her eyes blurred. She saw Mitchell spring into sight, incredibly tall to one now accustomed to little houses scarcely higher than sunflowers. It was a fantastic obelisk, its curved windows reflecting a phantom city of another age. She gazed at this sight as amazed as Beatie herself might have been, and as she did the last note of the half-hour sounded from the town hall clock. Was it possible that no time had passed at all? That all the weeks, months she had lived in another world, the kind of growing up she could never have experienced in this one, had occurred between one sonorous clang and another? The thought was so eerie she began to tremble. Time. Who knew anything about it? Because it passed at the common rate in 1873 was no reason at all to believe that time had also passed in the next century. But it was still winter, as it had been when she left her own time. In the light cotton dress she was chilled to the bone. The brown leaves of the plane trees, desiccated and fragile as brown paper, skidded past her. But which winter? Nervously she approached the playground. The children seemed to be wearing anoraks and woolly caps that had not changed. Overhead a jetliner arrowed. In its design she could see no change from those she knew. The lobby of Mitchell beamed of light, but she was afraid to approach it. Even if it's next year, she thought, and Mum has gone, what will I do? What will I say? But she could not stand there in the freezing wind forever. Resolutely she approached Mitchell. Something about her feet felt strange. She raised the hem of her skirt and saw that she was still wearing Dovey's circularly striped wool stockings and Granny Taliska's best shoes. I'll never be able to get them back to her now, she thought. Oh, what will she think of me? She then ran into the handsome lobby, into the lift and upstairs. Suddenly, she thought, the key of the unit, where is it? But it was still safely pinned inside the deep pocket of her dress. As she unlocked the door, she heard what was music to her. Vincent having one of his howling, kicking tantrums next door, and Justine bellowing at him as if she were about to go out of her mind. Thank God, said Abigail. She switched on the lamps. The clock said 20 to 6. A morning paper was tossed on the kitchen bench. Abigail seized it greedily. The date was still the 10th of May. It was incredible. So much had passed, terrors and friendships and shocks, the painful blisses and tender hurts of first love, and it had all happened between one bong from the town hall clock and another. She wanted to fall into the bare chair and cry for days. A burn on her arm stung, her bones ached, the back of her neck was still sunburnt from the cockling expedition. Her heart was beginning to hurt. She would never see Judah again, never in this life or any other. I can't think about that, thought Abigail frantically. but she knew that after the scene at the shop that day, so far away now she could hardly remember what had been said, her mother would come home early. She ran into her bedroom in panic, ripped off the shoes and stockings and threw them behind the drawer of her divan bed, where all her chief treasures had always been hidden, old diaries and broken beloved toys and the dress-up clothes of her childhood. A piece of paper fluttered out. On it was written in a childish hand, "I hope Jan gets pimples, and if I knew a witch she would too." Abigail threw it back in amongst the treasures in the dust. How little she had understood anything. She would think about burning the dress tomorrow. She ripped it off and pulled on sweaters and pants. Her face, had it changed? In some indescribable way it had. The skin was paler and finer, and her eyes seemed darker. Or had her eyelashes grown? Oh, sugar, my hair! It had grown nearly to her waist. She shook it out of its plait, still tied with a piece of red ribbon from Dovey's bridal chest, took the scissors and whacked it off to shoulder's length. It was crimped horizontally from months of plaiting. Her mother would be sure to notice. She knelt down and put her head under the bath faucet, scrubbed her scalp hard. The front door opened. "Are you there, Abigail?" "Sure thing, Mum." Quickly she whisked a towel around her wet hair, hid the slashed-off hair under her mattress, and went out to the living room. Kathy was all fluffed up like an angry bird. Abigail couldn't help smiling like an idiot at her, for she was so pleased to see her, not a day older, not a bit different, just Mum, volatile, loving, and her very own. "What are you grinning at, you little wretch? How could you do such a thing, running away like that without a word?" "I'm sorry, Mum, it was a childish thing to do, but I was upset and mad with you." "Well, that's understandable." Kathy stopped dead and stared at her daughter. "Funny, for a moment I thought you looked quite different, older or something." "It's my chic of Araby get-up," said Abigail, pushing the towel turban rakishly over one eye, but Kathy took her by the shoulders and turned her to the light. "It's amazing. You do look different. I suppose I just haven't looked at you properly lately." She flung her handbag in a chair. "Well, I've been in a flurry, not thinking straight. You know how I get. No brains to speak of, just fluff." She stared at Abigail again. "Just for a moment there I could see what you'd look like there, like in a few years' time. It was sort of eerie. I forget you're growing up, you see." "So do I," said Abigail. She threw her arms about her mother and almost lifted her off her feet. "If only you knew how glad I am to see you." "Gosh, it was so awful today," murmured Kathy. "Imagine us fighting." "I did a lot of thinking on the way home," began Abigail, but Kathy put a finger to her lip. "Not a word about it. Not tonight, anyway." Abigail nodded. In bed that night, Abigail wondered if Beatie had got back home safely. But she didn't come into my time. I think Granny was right. Beatie had the gift just for a little while, during and after that fever. Well, that will please her, little stirrer. Most of her thoughts were for Judah. She could not drive him out of her mind. The look in his eyes when he embraced Dovey, all his northern restraint gone, his gratitude and relief. "Love, you fool, not relief," said Abigail cruelly to herself. "He loves her, and why not? She is much nicer than you in every way. But if he could have looked at me that way, just once." She tried to turn her thoughts in another direction. Tomorrow she would wait till her mother had gone to Magpie's, and she would burn the crochet in the downstairs incinerator. Then the door in the Century would be closed forever. But Judah was so alive, so vivid to her. He filled her mind as he filled her heart. "I miss him, that's all," she said. She knew girls felt like that when they were 14 or so. She remembered Samantha Peel crying for a solid week when some pop star or other was discovered dead. "I would have looked after him and made him happy," Samantha had sobbed, "even if he was a druggie." She remembered girls falling crazily in love with teachers and older girls, making pests of themselves with constant ringings up and notes and gifts and waylayings. "I'll get over it," she thought. But she felt she was different from the others. She'd never had the frequent infatuations of other girls. She'd never been wrapped in anyone before. And also there was that knowledge she'd had that after she fell in love with Judah, the empty place inside her was no longer empty. It still wasn't empty, though very soon it would become so. But now she had to put him out of her head, go to sleep, lead the ordinary life of that ordinary schoolgirl, Abigail Kirk. She jumped out of bed, slid aside the window, and leant out into the icy, whipping sea wind. The winds go through you like a bodkin, taking a stitch or two on the way. She could hear Granny's voice talking about Orkney. I have to forget Granny too, in 1873, and Beatie and Dudley's little ring with the garnet. She stared blindly down upon this scintillant city, up at the Gemmy Bridge, across at the Opera House, faintly luminous like a marvellous butterfly poised on the sea. Whatever did Beatie think of that? A giant's magic palace. I never did have a chance to explain to her. She gave a sob that was half a snort because of the wind blowing into her mouth. That beastly place is more real than this one. And it isn't. There probably isn't any shop anymore on the corner of Cambridge and Argyle streets. I mustn't cry. My eyes will swell up, and Mum will notice tomorrow morning. I've got to go to sleep. She folded up her green dress and took it to bed with her. She stroked it softly, and after a little while she slept. But her sleep was full of dreams. They were strange dreams. She saw Trooper bow, his legs and arms chained together, and the chain threaded through an iron ring on the wall. His eyes wandered wildly, and tears ran down his cheeks in a ceaseless stream. She knew they had put him in the lunatic asylum, and his family could not rescue him. She struggled desperately to tell the attendants, "He's not mad. It's just his wound. He's the kindest of fathers. Don't take him away from his children." She saw Beatie in someone's study, for the walls were lined with bookshelves. Beatie sat at a leather-topped table, her head bent over a book. Small and upright, she was not a child any longer, but a young woman. Her hair was plastered smooth and parted with mathematical precision in the centre. The rest was caught up in a black knitted snood or net. "Oh, Beatie," cried Abigail gladly, "what are you reading? Is it Latin? Is Mr. Taylor tutoring you after all?" But Beatie did not hear. Her face was severe and resolute. It was then that Abigail noticed that not only the snood was black, the girl was in mourning. But for whom? Not dear Granny. Oh, did Gibbie die after all? In a flash the study vanished and Abigail was on a ship. The waves ran along the side, leaping and hissing. They were as grey as marble. The ship rolled and creaked. There was a drumming from up in the air, where the wet sails flickered out showers of salty drops. But she felt no movement. Muffled in his pea-jacket, a woolen cap on his bright head, Judah sat on a roll of canvas, mending some ship's gear, or so she thought. He had not got older as Beatie had. "Judah!" she cried joyfully, but he did not look up. The pulley and rope in his fingers changed to a knife and a little wooden figure he was whittling. Somehow she knew it was herself. With an exclamation she could not hear, he tossed it overboard, where it turned into Abby herself, clad in Dovey's blouse and serge skirt, rising stiffly up and down in the waves like a statue or a ship's figurehead. "Oh, Judah," sobbed Abigail, "how could you?" She awoke, confused and frightened, to find her mother shaking her. "You were having such a nightmare, yelling and crying." She sat down beside her daughter, who was blinking dazedly into the night. "Are you sure you're all right?" "He threw me away," sobbed Abigail. "But I saved Dovey for him, didn't I?" There, poor pet," soothed her mother. "It's just a nightmare. My goodness, what a dramatic one." "Oh, Mum," sobbed Abigail, "why is life so awful? Why do people have to put up with so many terrible things? Why is it when you love someone they don't love you?" "Hush now," said Kathy. "You've been dreaming. It's all right now. You'll have forgotten in the morning." Next day Abigail did not speak of her dreams, and her mother concluded she had forgotten them. But she took her daughter by the shoulders and looked at her searchingly. "You are different." "How could I be, Mum?" asked Abigail with a smile. Kathy shook her head. "Of course you can't be. The main thing is that you're just the same," said Abigail. She walked into Magpie's with the sensation that she was returning after a long absence. It was so different from Samuel Bow, confectioner, so cunningly arranged, so full of vivid or comical treasures. Against the wall stood painted flats from ballet companies which had visited Sydney in Kathy's childhood, Scheherazad's gold-latticed windows and Alibaba jars, and mysterious avenues of trees from Les Philides' enchanted grove. There was an embroidered stool and an auto harp painted with yellow roses, and miniatures of little boys with sailor suits and tomato cheeks. Kathy was busy cleaning the family pictures she had brought from the sale at St. Mary's. Some of the portraits had been hand-tinted. "Amazing colours the Victorians wore," she commented. "Look at this. Blue crinoline skirt, magenta jacket, and a yellow feather on the bonnet." "The poor people didn't," corrected Abigail. "They wore brown holland and a grey woolen stuff, and a white pinafore, and funny stockings with stripes going round and round like Glasgow Rock." "What on earth do you know about Glasgow Rock?" asked her mother. "Saw them in an old sweet shop window," replied her daughter truthfully. She felt defeated and restless, and as Kathy had come almost to the end of her cataloguing and pricing, she asked if she could go home. Kathy gave her a keen look. "Feel all right, do you, pet?" "Bored with holidays, that's all," Abigail shrugged. "But I'm not going home to sit in the bare chair and mump. I thought I'd take a walk around the rocks and look at things. It's such a funny old place." Before she went, she hugged her mother and said, "It's all right about Norway, you know." "Well, I'm blowed," said Kathy. She stammered. "But what? How? I don't know why I made such a fuss," said Abigail. "I just don't know. I suppose it was a shock or something. But it's all right. If Dad still wants me to come too, then I will." Kathy's eyes shone. She gave a little jump of excitement. "Shh," cautioned Abigail. "A customer." "See you tonight, Mum." As she hurried up Argyle Street, it was almost as if she were going home. She could almost smell the sugary odour of the sweet shop. She looked around to see if Beatie were stamping up the street, frowning and discontented. But Argyle Street was sunny and deserted. It was not the right time for tourists, or perhaps they were all in the Argyle Arts Centre. She went past the art centre and stood under a bare tree and looked at the wall on the corner of Cambridge Street. A brick wall. She didn't know what was behind it, and didn't care either. Across Cambridge Street flooded strings of laundry just as they had in Granny's time. The traffic bellowed overhead on the highway. In this sunny, empty world she wandered about. It was clean and seemingly uninhabited. Was it only last night she saw this street teeming with ragged, grubby, and vital citizens, selling, buying, yelling, exhibiting fighting dogs, piglets, the infant phenomenon? The Garrison Church didn't look any different, except that now it had a symbol of the Trinity on its east end. Broken steps that ran nowhere, a tangle of blue periwinkle and brambles, climbed up behind the church to the ridge where the residence of the schoolmaster had stood in what was then Prince's Street. Had Beatie ever run joyfully up those steps to Mr. Taylor's study, there to achieve the education for which she had been so famished? It was amazing, terrifying, but all signs of the family's life could have so completely vanished, as if they had never been. It was as if time were a vast black hole which swallowed up all trace of human woes and joys and small hopes and tendernesses, and the same thing would happen to her and her parents. Abigail turned away, walked through a maze of lanes still familiar. Where the incline became too severe, the alleyway turned into a flight of steps. Cottages still clung and perched, or were built into the living rock. The cliffs were water-stained under the wind to flowering vines. Fig roots snaked down as they had always done. There were still privies at the end of shoebox yards. Only the people had gone, the beggars, the urchins with dirt-stiff hair, the dogs with mange, the hatter with 12 hats, all claim. Queer how independent and jaunty they had been. Poor as dirt, but full of vitality. She did not dare to go to the top of the cliff above Walsh Bay, where she and Beatie and Judah had climbed down the Jacob's ladder to the seashore and the dory. It would be all docks, all different. It was like a dream, one that hurt as if a knitting needle had been stuck in her chest. The empty place inside her had become so empty she could not bear it any longer and turned towards home. She took her cut-off hair and green dress and went down the back elevator to the big incinerator that belonged to the tower block. It was easy to rip the Edwardian fabric to pieces. It was perished anyway, after all. She threw it into the incinerator and poked it down with an iron rake. The crochet yoke remained in one piece. She held it a moment, inhaling those old odours of Dovey's bridal chest, mothballs and lavender, and a faint sweetness that came, so Beatie had told her, from the tail of a muskrat, sewn up in muslin. She threw it on top of the smouldering rags of her dress. The flames blazed up briefly. She saw a line of crimson run around the outline of a flower, turn black and charred. "No, I can't," said Abigail, and she put in her hand and snatched it out. She stamped out the small flames that wagged here and there, shook away the blackened pieces, and folded it up small. "I didn't say honour bright to Beatie." She remembered. She put it away with Dovey's stockings and Mrs. Taliska's shoes.